All right. We have a quorum. It's the appointed time. I call to order the meeting of the Bills Committee. Let's first invite the representatives of the administration to come inside the conference room. Welcome, representatives of the administration. We have Ms. Elaine Mack, Deputy Secretary for Health 3 of the Health Bureau, Mr. Derek Lee, Principal Assistant Secretary for Health 3 Health Bureau, Ms. Lucia Ko, Principal Nursing Officer of the Department of Health, Ms. Harriet Chan, Secretary Nursing Council, Department of Health, Dr. Danny Tong, Chief Manager, Nursing, Chief Nurse Executive, Hospital Authority. We have 14 deputations today. I would like to welcome the 14 or 15 deputations here today. We have each deputation that will speak for 5 minutes, and deputations would have to stop speaking when the bell rings. Deputations are reminded that written submissions and oral presentations made to the Bills Committee are not protected under the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. The first to speak would be Dr. Iris Lee, Director of the Nethersoil Institute of Continuing Holistic Health Education, NICHE of Hong Kong. Dr. Iris Lee, please. Or Professor Thomas Wong, Acting President of the Hong Kong Nanyang College of Higher Education. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to speak on behalf of the college and the sector. I do support the amendments. In my opinion, the focus should be on the implementation. The bill sets out very clearly the relevant requirements, and the relevant core competencies and reference guides are very comprehensive. Regarding when mainland nurses are to work in Hong Kong, whether they should work in government institutions or the Department of Health, whether they can be eligible for full registration or enrollment after 5 years. That is what I want to focus on today. I believe it is necessary to have assessment by the Nursing Council in order to be eligible for full registration or enrollment. If this power is to be granted to specified institutions, this should be valid still. If the process takes too long or cannot be standardized, the Nursing Council can take up the responsibility to make the competencies more comprehensive and to adopt standardized criteria and indicators. And I believe this should be tabulated if necessary. I think with the adoption of technologies, it wouldn't be that difficult. And we are not starting from scratch here because we have various institutions that are already adopting that approach. So I think the Nursing Council can issue a comprehensive paper for future follow-up. I support the legislative amendments also because for nurses who are to work in Hong Kong for over 5 years, we can assess them in psychosocial aspects as well. For psychiatric nurses, we would also adopt the approach of continuous assessment to see if nursing students would do well in psychosocial aspects. And when we train nursing students, we would assess them in that regard as well to see if they have the right attitude. I think we can make use of this opportunity to, apart from looking at the nursing students or nurses' core competencies, we can look at their psychosocial aspects continuously. I do understand there are other performance indicators adopted, but I think we can focus on this aspect more. It is important to practice interpersonal communication with patients, family members, as well as other stakeholders. And if we can assess them in this regard, we would be able to make sure that they comply with the relevant requirements. Well, sorry, I would like to speak on one more point. I hope that the Nursing Council could take this opportunity to review the core competencies. Due to medical advancements, I believe we should review the relevant core competencies. Thank you. Next, Professor Alice Loke, Director of the Department of Nursing of the Hong Kong Adventist College. Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank you for inviting me to join the discussion of this item. I would like to say that for certain mainland students taking our curriculum, they have tried to take the Hong Kong licensing examination. They have taken it twice or thrice, but they failed, and they chose to start all over from EN to RN. I think there should be more integration between the curricula that in the mainland and in Hong Kong. As Professor Wong said, I think there should be incorporation of psychosocial elements into the curriculum, and we should allow assessments by tutors to see if their work is any different. And when after 5 years, when they are confirmed to be eligible for full registration and or enrollment, there should still be assessment done. Thank you. Next, Professor Janet Wong, Dean of School of Nursing and Health Studies of the Hong Kong Metropolitan University. Thank you, Chair. We do support having alternative pathways for nurses registration and other legislative amendments. I would like to thank the Health Bureau for submitting some supplementary papers on the details of the implementation of the arrangements. We think that the arrangements can be trusted. We are more concerned about the vetting of applications. It is expected that 300 to 500 non-local nurses may be hired, and they will work in the Department of Health. Some of them would work in the Department of Health or residential care homes. I wonder if the vetting of the applications of non-local nurses will affect the registration of local graduates. So I hope the administration can take that into consideration when deploying manpower. I also support what was said by Professor Thomas Wong. I believe the administration can set up with Bay Area institutions nursing courses that would integrate the curricula of both Hong Kong and the mainland. We also have to review the learning hours for our current 5-year curriculum to make sure it would keep pace with the times. We should also make use of our resources to make sure we have the right kind of nurses that will be able to serve the public. Next, Dr. Mimi Tu, Vice Principal of the St. Teresa's Hospital School of Nursing. Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the St. Teresa's Hospital School of Nursing. I would like to say that continuing nursing education, CNE, is very important. We need to also provide support to the soon-to-be incoming nurses. And is it the case that once the nurses are hired, whether they are automatically qualified in terms of performance? We would hope that the employer's HA or DH would assess their performance and that such assessment should be continuous and make sure that they would comply with the performance requirements. Thank you. Thank you. Professor William Lee of the Netherstall School of Nursing of the Faculty of Medicine of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I speak on behalf of the Netherstall School of Nursing of the Chinese University of Hong Kong to support the relevant legislative amendments. I also support the imposition of continuing nursing education requirement, as these will increase the number of nurses and enhance the quality of nurses. It is said that nurses on special registration or enrollment SRE will be eligible for full registration or enrollment 5 years after they have first enrolled or registered. We think while this is desirable, we need to make sure there are safeguards in place. For example, there should be continuous assessments. We should also make sure there are standardized criteria. Most importantly, the Nursing Council should play the gatekeeper role to ensure the quality of nursing service and that public safety is protected. The Nursing Council should have the power to draw up the criteria of assessment to ensure the nurses would meet the core competencies. The Nursing Council should also be able to set the criteria for assessing officers, and if such assessments have failed, the relevant nurses have failed the assessment, they should take the assessment again. They should also be tested in different areas such as injections and CPR and so on. In the long term, we must enhance local training in order to alleviate long-term the shortage of nurses. We should also review the relevant licensing examination arrangements. We should put in place measures to minimize the wastage of nurses, especially senior nurses. We should soon implement the nursing practitioner scheme that will boost the morale of nurses and enhance their sense of satisfaction. In turn, that will minimize wastage. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee. We now come to Ms. Cecilia Chen from Hong Kong U Space College of Life Sciences and Technology. Our school supports this amendment. Now, there will be nurses from non-local settings. The Department of Health and the hospital authority should apply uniform standards. And how do we get these nurses to full registration after 3 to 5 years? That's our biggest concern. We now come to the next speaker, Ms. Chen Ka Lim from the Hong Kong Infection Control Nurses Association. Our association sees the necessity for the amendment, but we have gathered some concerns from our members. Two areas. First, the impact on locally trained nurses. Would there be a quota on the number of non-locally trained nurses? Will there be a ratio set on the share of local versus non-local trained nurses? If we have enough local nurses, will there be a pause on bringing in non-locally trained nurses? Will there be the same promotion ladder for both local and non-local nurses? Now we turn to quality. Non-local nurses will work at local institutions in Hong Kong. Who will be there to assess their work performance? Will we rely on frontline local nurses to provide guidance and supervision? Will there be extra manpower for the training so that non-local nurses will have an easier time integrating into local work environment and care for patients? And for the criteria of assessment, we would like to see those details made public so that we know that the non-locally trained nurses will be just like their local counterparts in providing quality care. And finally, once the assessment is done, does that mean the non-locally trained nurses will be able to work independently, just like a local nurse with full registration? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. We now come to Mr. Ho Hong Kwan from the Association of Hong Kong Nursing Staff. Our body has upheld professionalism, social commitment, offering better care for the public. We have been campaigning for rights of our profession and seeking to improve the care. We have been faced with chronic staff shortage in nurses. Our nurse-to-population ratio is behind that of many developed countries. The nursing workforce is aging. The attrition rate is going up in the public healthcare system. Now, because of an amendment in 2023 for care homes, there will be higher minimum staffing ratio for care homes. Starting from 2028, care homes will have to hire another 280 nurses. That's why the Labor and Welfare Bureau requires us care homes to hire another 280 nurses. The government has brought in channels to have more nurses, and this includes bringing in non-locally trained nurses to enhance professionalism for nurses. And that's why we have this proposal. We now come to our thoughts on this amendment. 1. The Hong Kong Nursing Council should have the final say. For special registration or enrollment, when a nurse works at more than one institution for more than 5 years, the work performance has to satisfy the institution and also meet the criteria set by the NCHK. This nurse has to be assessed to be competent and satisfactory. And only then this nurse can get full registration. This is a good idea, but there are things that we should look out for. In an actual work setting, to acquire the skills and experience, continuous training is needed. But in the draft bill, the final say does not rest with the NCHK. We have concerns. So we think the NCHK should be the gatekeeper. It should have the final say to ensure the quality and professionalism of nurses are safeguarded. Now, our second recommendation. The work has to be no less than 5 years. There will be no licensing exams. We are very worried about this. in terms of clinical experience and how much in terms of experience does the applicant need before application. Now, there has to be assessment on clinical skills and also theory and also interpersonal skills and language skills. We need to make sure the nurses meet all those standards to ensure we have high quality nurses. A third recommendation is that we recommend a regular review of the number of nurses through the limited and special registration or enrollment systems. We need to review the changes in the total number of nurses. And this means the government and the nursing council need to keep track of this. We need a cap on the number of non-locally trained nurses. We need to ensure the quality of nurses to enhance their job satisfaction and professional development. All in all, our association understands that we need healthcare staff, there is an aging population, there is attrition rate. Bringing in non-locally trained nurses should only be a stopgap solution. In the long run, the government needs to look at short-term, medium-term, and long-term measures to increase the number of local nurses, especially frontline nurses. Our association also looks forward to details of the amendment proposal to allay concerns from the trade. Thank you. And then from the St. Francis University, Dr. Carol Chen, from the School of Health Studies Sciences of St. Francis University. My university welcomes this amendment. We also have concerns. Mainland and overseas nurses will be able to come here. They can work for 3 or 5 years and then they get full registration. There needs to be continuous and consistent assessment to make sure that the incoming nurses meet our local standards. Every year, there are more than 1,000 students joining the nursing programs. Based on the Nursing Council's requirement for example, registered nurses, it's 1,250 hours of school time and plus 1,400 hours of practical training. So that's close to 3,000 hours in total, lecture plus practicum. Can we reduce those hours, especially for the practicum? Reducing the hours of internship has been discussed on different occasions, but the discussion got nowhere. Reducing the hours of practicum or internship can help. When you have excessive hours, that hampers the availability of nurses. It's 1,600 hours of internship, in fact. The Nursing Council requires that up to 10% of the internship can be achieved outside Hong Kong. We're stressing integration into our country and leverage the Greater Bay Area. Can we raise the share of non-local internships? Can we allow more students to work at more mainland GBA locations for the internship? Every year, we get more than 1,000 locally trained, registered, and enrolled nurses. We have an aging society. We need many nurses. At some point, the market reaches saturation. The market cannot absorb an indefinite number of nurses. It may be premature to say this, but let's think ahead. When saturation comes along, how do we strike a balance between jobs for local nurses and jobs for non-local nurses? That's all from me. Thank you, Chairman. From Tonghua College, Professor Kwan Yu Cho. Our college supports this amendment for the most part. There's a notable shortage of nursing staff. We understand this amendment, we support it. We want to highlight some points. First, the admission age. There's a requirement that you have to be aged 18 or above to get into a nursing school, but DSE leavers may not hit that age. And this also applies to the renewal of practicing licenses. And we also support the proposal about special and limited registration and enrollment. We want to highlight 2 points of concern. And this is the impact on local employment. This amendment is based on the report. It's a manpower projection that shows a staff shortage down the road. But we have more local training places. This means over time the gap will narrow. So we may not have the same gap down the road. But once you amend this ordinance, we will keep getting non-local nurses, so that may have an impact on the local employment scene. So we do have some comment on special registration. The NCHK should lay down principles so that we can have a cap on non-local nurses. Say we can have a ratio of local versus non-local nurses. That should be based on market need and the number of local nurses. And this cap should be revised from time to time. We need a mechanism to do that. That can ensure jobs for locally trained nurses. Because locally trained nurses are in the best position to meet our healthcare needs. Our second concern, it's about quality. When someone comes through the special registration pathway, there are core competencies. The nurse works at an institution. There is continuous monitoring of performance. The nurse works in only one setting instead of all settings. This can be allowed. It's understandable given the manpower crunch. We do have a concern though. For the special registration pathway, this nurse can get full registration one day. To get there, this nurse does not need to take a licensing exam. We have concerns. If a nurse already has achieved their credentials from its own degree, then that's fine. But can we have some kind of channel? When a nurse has only worked in a specific setting, we need to find a way to ensure this nurse can also work in other settings. So in quality assurance, the NCHK needs to act as the gatekeeper. For the nurse to achieve full registration, the NCHK needs to ensure there is clinical observation to make sure this nurse has the core competencies, and the assessors need to have the right qualifications. For example, professional nurses, the NCHK can also develop these credentials and the criteria for continuous assessment. The methodology for continuous assessment should also be developed by the NCHK and implemented by the employer. So these are our thoughts on quality assurance. Thank you.
副秘書
Thank you, Ms. Yongfeng Yi, Deputy Secretary General of the Hospital and Clinic Nurses Association, HCNA. Thank you. Happy New Year to all of you. We did submit 3 recommendations before, and upon discussion, we would support the relevant legislative amendments. In fact, many nurses of the association have background in the mainland, and many of them would like to know more about 13A and 13B, in the sense that if their performance is satisfactory as deemed by the employer, they will be eligible for full registration or enrollment. I think right now the criteria are not clear. What criteria will be drawn up? What references would they make when drawing up the relevant criteria for residential care homes or hospitals? And the nurses who have worked in them, they have made mistakes still, as judged by recent news reports. I don't think there are enough safeguards in place at the moment to prevent abuse to elderly persons and children. And these should be caught in assessments if there are such assessments. So I hope that in future, with nurses who are not trained locally, they would have a different curriculum when they study nursing. So I think we need to have standardized criteria on both technical aspects as well as moral aspects to ensure they comply with the relevant requirements. If we use existing criteria for RNs and ENs, that may not be enough. I think the Nursing Council should act as a gatekeeper. Obviously, we do face a chronic manpower shortage of nurses. I would like to say finally and clearly that we are trying to save people's lives here. We do have youngsters in the mainland and locally studying nursing diligently. While I do respect the interests of mainland nurses, for local graduates, I may have concerns for their prospects if you have introduced pathways for non-locally trained nurses. And some may think that if nursing does not have good prospects, they may not study nursing altogether. I think it would be desirable to set up an institution in the Bay Area that would provide education to nurses, and that would be we would be able to implement an integrated curriculum. Thank you. Goodbye. Next, Professor Sylvia Feng of the Hong Kong Academy of Nursing and Midwifery. Thank you, Chair. We do support the legislative amendments, but I think we should be clear about the principle that limited registration or enrollment LRE would be to tide over the manpower shortage. For special registration or enrollment, it would be different because they would have the potential to move on to full registration or enrollment, and thus they should be treated differently. I do have some suggestions to make. In the legislative brief, we can see that the Nursing Council must approve the relevant arrangements, and there is no way for the Nursing Council to disapprove the registration or enrollment. I am afraid that this may affect the Nursing Council in performing its role as a gatekeeper. When one applies for full registration or enrollment, there should be assessment to ensure the accession to full registration or enrollment is fair. Different employers would have different sets of criteria. While we do support performance appraisal in the workplace, there should be standardized criteria for the transition to full registration or enrollment. So we hope that the administration can deploy more resources in one, the putting in place a comprehensive computer system for future monitoring of nurses. 2, there should be additional manpower in the Nursing Council, and there should be dedicated office that would monitor the nurses' registration system. Also, the employer institutions should have the right resources to allow them to supervise the nurses, coach them, and evaluate nurses, especially nurses on special registration or enrollment. Lastly, the Nursing Council should have adequate manpower to play the gatekeeper role to ensure the quality of service and professionalism of nurses. Lastly, and most importantly, this is just an ancillary mechanism. We should focus on training nurses locally to alleviate long-term shortage of nurses. I have worked for 50-odd years in the trade, and I have never heard that there was adequate nurses. So I hope the administration can do more in this regard. Thank you. That's it for me today. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Cecilia So, Chairman of the Hong Kong Nurses General Union. Thank you, Chair. Members, good afternoon. We have a chronic shortage of nurses, and we have faced increasingly high attrition rate of nurses in recent years. We believe the legislative amendments would alleviate the imminent shortage of nurses, and we do support the introduction of more pathways to allow non-locally trained nurses to work in Hong Kong. In order to protect the basic rights of patients, we hope that the government would ensure that non-locally trained nurses hold qualifications and training recognized by the Nursing Council. The government must set up an effective mechanism that will stringently assess the nurses' qualifications, the quality of training provided by training institutions, and their nurses' work experience. We believe the Nursing Council should play the gatekeeper role, and the Nursing Council should draw up the relevant appraisal criteria to assess the performance of nurses. The criteria should be standardized, and nurses should meet such criteria before they apply for full registration or enrollment. We believe these should be set out in the bill to ensure there is proper implementation of these aspects. Let me share with you my experience. In 1997, the administration tried to introduce ASEAN nurses. They would be on 3-year contracts. At the time, 2 nurses from Singapore joined my ward. I believe at the time the training provided in Singapore and Hong Kong was more or less the same, and they found it very easy to adapt to the work in the ward, and they soon picked up the relevant work. After that, a nurse from another Southeast Asian country came to Hong Kong. I would first like to declare that I am not discriminating against the nationality of the nurse, but they did not meet the relevant criteria. For example, when a gastric tube was inserted by the nurse, we would normally have to assess the position in which the tube was inserted before we start feeding the patient, but the nurse concerned did not do so, and it was very dangerous. We hope that the Nursing Council can devise standardized criteria to assess the performance of nurses as a result. We object to the fact that employers would have the right to make essentially the assessment of whether the performance of nurses, in the sense that as long as it is deemed by them that the performance is satisfactory, the nurses will be eligible for full registration or enrollment, because there may be potential conflict of interest at play. We think if the Nursing Council would be responsible for monitoring and auditing the relevant assessments, that would be desirable, and more funding should be provided to them to deal with this workload. We also support that CNE would be a precondition for renewal of registration or enrollment, but we hope that the administration can provide a grace period and lower the credit requirements for CNE so that most nurses can renew their registrations or enrollments. In the long term, I think the administration should do more to retain local nurses, especially with experienced nurses. The academy is more than willing to work with the administration to provide better working conditions for nurses and provide more development for nurses to enhance their sense of belonging of the sector. Thank you.
We now hear from Mr. Alex Chiu from the Evangel Hospital. Chairman, everyone, good afternoon. I'm from a private hospital. Our hospital is also concerned about the shortage of nurses. Other speakers have mentioned their concerns, such as ensuring the quality of nurses and the ratio, a possible ratio between local versus non-local nurses. We share these concerns. I want to focus on just one point, and that is non-local nurses will be here. How do we get the public to have confidence in these non-local nurses? This is where the government needs to do more. That's all from me. Thank you. I thank all deputations who have spoken today. I now invite the government to give a preliminary reply to the deputation's submissions. Thank you, Chairman. I thank all the deputations joining us today. Last year, we approached some groups. They have written to us with their thoughts. On behalf of the government, I also want to thank everyone who has provided submissions. I can see there is a generally positive and supportive stance towards our proposal on gatekeeping over quality of non-local nurses and helping non-local nurses adjust to the local work environment. Deputations have made many comments. We fully agree that the Nursing Council should be the gatekeeper in terms of the quality of nurses. So there are two things we do. One, for the limited registration/enrollment and the special enrollment and registration, our proposal is that the Nursing Council of Hong Kong will look at the qualifications of non-local nurses. The NCHK will look at the curriculum of those programs. The curriculum has to be similar to Hong Kong's local nursing training programs. This is to ensure that the core competencies of the incoming nurses are similar to our local nurses. Now, there is also professional autonomy. The Nursing Council is the regulator of the nursing profession. The NCHK has been dealing with nursing registration on its own. And that includes issuing practicing certificates. Under our proposal, the NCHK will get to keep its professional role. On whether non-local nurses meet the professional standards for special or limited registration and enrollment, and also whether these non-local nurses meet the standards for transitioning to a full registration, the Nursing Council will decide on that based on the criteria, based on the provisions of our proposal. Many deputations have mentioned we need continuous training and resources for locally trained nurses. I want to stress that locally trained nurses will be the backbone of our local healthcare system. The government will continue to commit resources to training local nurses. Some deputations raised concerns about manpower. In the short term, we still have many vacancies in the nursing rank, so we need more nurses to keep our services running. At the Hospital Authority and the Department of Health, we require priority for hiring local nurses. It's only when there is a shortfall and then we go ahead to recruit non-locally trained nurses. The Secretary for Health will designate institutions that can hire special registration nurses. We will have a similar requirement. We will convey this expectation to the social welfare sector as well. That is priority for locally trained nurses. Some deputations also mentioned when non-local nurses serve in institutions, their pay and remuneration will be the same as locally trained nurses. Non-local nurses come here, they get a limited or special registration. Once they get the license, they will be subject to oversight by the Nursing Council of Hong Kong. So if these nurses have professional conduct issues, they will be monitored by the Nursing Council. Deputations also touch on gatekeeping over quality and other issues. And that is for special registration nurses. When they qualify for a full registration, what happens next? Deputations have raised certain views. We provided a supplementary reply after the last meeting, and that is a work-based assessment. We agree with deputations on the point that continuous assessment matters. So the work-based assessment serves this purpose because it lets the employer get a clearer idea of the performance of these non-local nurses at the setting of the HA or the DH. And that will give the employer a more solid basis to assess the performance. I want to stress a few points for our proposal. For those transitioning to full registration, the assessment criteria will be set by the Nursing Council. This is to show the professional role played by the NCHK. It has a role to play and it applies consistent standards across all nurses. Work-based assessment needs to be impartial to show whether a nurse meets all the standards. So in the implementation, the Nursing Council can set the assessment methods and practical arrangements such as specific requirements, assessment methods for specific skills, competencies, frequencies, etc. Now, for the employers, this means the HA and the DH. When the DH and the HA assess the performance of non-local nurses, they have to judge whether the nurses are performing in a satisfactory way based on criteria set by the Nursing Council. If the NCHK has doubt about the performance, say the assessor has questions about statements over a nurse's performance, the Nursing Council can follow up the cases with the HA or the DH. The Nursing Council has the power to ask the HA or the DH to reassess a nurse's performance or submit a new report. So this means the NCHK will be able to set the criteria and continue to have the authority to follow up on the cases over the course of the implementation. That's the sensible way to go. So that's gatekeeping. Just then, there were comments about retaining local talent and helping incoming nurses adjust to the local work environment. The hospital authority has similar plans such as the preceptorship program of the HA. We get senior nurses to act as mentors for new nurses. This can help new incoming nurses adjust to work in the ward. This can also ease the pressure on frontline senior nurses as they lead junior nurses in their work. So these are some ways that the HA can give support to incoming nurses. This is also a way to ensure we don't add to the burden on frontline nurses. The Department of Health will also have all kinds of events such as mentorship programs, training, etc., to help incoming nurses adapt to Hong Kong's work environment and operating procedure. Just then, there were comments about retaining talent. We have provided a written response. Chairman, if we have time, maybe I will invite my colleague from the hospital authority to briefly walk us through that paper. Some deputations mentioned continuous nursing education. We will continue to provide resources for the Nursing Council. There will be new registration and enrollment applications. New requirements will kick in. The Secretariat will see a lot more work at the Nursing Council. So the government is ready to provide more resources, and where needed, we will provide manpower support for the Secretariat so we can all rest assured that registration for local nursing graduates will not see their own registration applications impeded. So local graduates will get their practicing certificates just as quickly as before. Now, on the grace period, it came up during the speeches. Continuous nursing education will be a prerequisite for renewing practicing certificates. We will talk to the Nursing Council about this on when we can let this new requirement kick in. We have to have regard to the fact that existing practitioners need to be aware of the new rule, and the Secretariat has to arrange its work. We need to ensure smooth operation and minimize the impact on practitioners. Now, on nurses training programs, we received some comments during the consultation. Just then, a deputation mentioned the lecture/practicum hours and the core competencies. We got many comments during the consultation. We will continue to follow up on these matters with the Nursing Council to ensure that we move with the times in our local nursing programs to meet our local healthcare needs. Once again, I thank everyone for sharing their thoughts with us. We will continue to work with the hospital authority, the Nursing Council, and the healthcare profession to work on this to improve the work. Can I invite my colleague from the hospital authority to speak? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Elaine. I speak on behalf of the hospital authority. I would like to supplement information in two regards. Regarding measures to retain talents, I will talk about some salient points. We have the office to hire part-time nurses that have allowed us to flexibly engage part-time nurses to join the HA to alleviate the pressure on full-time nurses. We have also provided more training opportunities. In our experience, we found that training opportunities within the HA would be very attractive to employees. That's why we'll continue to provide training opportunities. We have also opened new positions such as nursing consultant and associate nursing consultant and advanced practice nurses. We have increased positions by 400. We have thus improved promotion opportunities for nurses, and nurses would think that they have better prospects working at the hospital authority. As many deputations said, the preceptorship program is most definitely necessary for local graduates and non-locally trained nurses. The program is very important in helping them adapt to work in institutions and the hospital authority in particular. We would definitely need funding in that regard, so we do thank the administration for providing funding to us. We recently also have the Greater Bay Area Visiting Program, and 17 nurses have completed the program. And that would definitely help them with their clinical work. We've also provided allowances for special nurses. We have also provided housing subsidies to nurses. We are indeed faced with an insurmountable problem, but we do see that there is a slight improvement in 2022 and 2023, and last year it was 9.5% of nurses gap at the moment. Thank you. Will the administration provide an additional paper that will elaborate on the various kinds of information that is provided? Thank you, Chair. I believe our reply at the moment would address the concerns of deputations, but if deputations would like us to provide further information, we're more than willing to do so. Thank you. Thank you. I will now open the floor to members. For members who wish to speak, please press the request to speak button. Ms. Chen Hao-yan. Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the Deputy Secretary for giving your reply. But I want to ask, for nurses on limited registration or enrollment, they will not be able to move on to full registration or enrollment. Excuse me, let me take a look. They are not eligible for full registration or enrollment. For those on special registration on enrollment, in order to be eligible for full registration or enrollment, it would depend on the employer's assessment, and the performance has to be deemed satisfactory, even though it is by reference to the criteria specified by the Nursing Council. The performance is supposed to be appraised by the employing institution, and specifically, it would most likely be the nurse's direct supervisors. There may be 10 criteria here, but it would be the employing institution that would make that assessment. Would they be able to make the appropriate assessment? So you are saying that this is no different from before, as the nursing council would continue to be the entity to devise criteria, but since the nursing council is no longer the one checking whether the nurses comply with the relevant criteria, I do have my reservations. Also, I can see that I want to see if the administration has a reply to the relevant issues raised at the last meeting. Thank you. And thank you, Chair. I think we would still need time to address some questions raised by the legal advisor, and we unfortunately won't be able to provide a reply to the legal advisor's letter today. In future, we would do that as soon as possible. I would first like to clarify that those on limited registration or enrollment cannot move on to full registration or enrollment. It would only be those on special registration or enrollment SRE who can do so. We have heard suggestions by the member and deputations before that the employing institutions could appraise the performance, because that would facilitate the appraisal, as they are the ones who would directly supervise performance. What matters is whether such criteria are implemented in a standardized manner. There is a working group under the Nursing Council that discussed the criteria concerned for non-locally trained nurses and how to implement the arrangements for the transition of nurses on SRE to full registration or enrollment. We have said in the paper that we would draw reference to the core competencies devised by the Nursing Council, such as the promotion of health and nursing and other aspects such as teamwork. We will also invite the Nursing Council to devise the specific criteria in each aspect. I believe the Council would issue the guidelines when they are ready. As for the members' concern on whether the employing institutions can make appropriate assessments of whether the nurses have complied with the criteria devised by the Nursing Council, we understand that the Nursing Council can engage third parties to review the mechanism to ensure there is effective implementation. We think that work-based assessment would have to be undertaken in the workplace, that is, in their daily work setting. And I think this is accepted by the trade. We believe the focus should be on, once the criteria have been devised, there should be requirements for the assessors as for what they have to do. And we think we should leave this to the Nursing Council to stipulate the detailed requirements. Thank you. I can see that Professor Chen Wing-Kwong and Mr. Letong Kwok have pressed the request to speak button. If other members wish to speak, please also press the request to speak button. Thank you, Professor Chen Wing-Kwong. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I would like to thank deputations for coming today, and I heard the valuable views made by this deputations. The administration should address the views and take into consideration the views. I think we should also minimize the wastage of nurses. I do know that Singapore has recently launched a retention plan for nurses who have worked in a set number of years in public hospitals. They can get 100,000 Singaporean dollars. That is approximately 580,000 Hong Kong dollars. So did the administration try to find out why nurses are leaving? Is it due to work or is it due to the lack of benefits? What is the administration planning to do in order to minimize wastage of nurses? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Member, for your views. In our understanding, the shortage of nurses in Hong Kong, the problem is multifaceted. That's why the hospital authority has implemented a variety of measures to enhance the working conditions of nurses. We have also increased the pay and enhanced their fringe benefits. We have recently provided a housing loan scheme for professionals, medical professionals other than doctors. That would include nurses. We have introduced alternative pathways to admit non-locally trained nurses would be one of the methods that we could alleviate the pressure on frontline nurses, because we have heard that for some nurses who would like to have more flexible work arrangements or who would like to undertake further training, they could not do so because the shortage of frontline nurses was simply too serious. So in future, we'll definitely look into different ways to enhance the working prospects as well as working conditions of nurses. Thank you. Mr. Lai Tong Kwok. Thank you. I want to ask in particular the representative of the Academy of Nursing. I would first like to praise how detailed the paper is. I believe that was written by Professor Sylvia Feng. I do appreciate that they have read the paper given by the administration. And I can see that they spoke specifically about non-locally trained nurses. I want to talk about this because mainland would not be overseas, so we should be specific about non-locally trained, and I see that mistake being made by the administration instead. The Academy of Nursing did not make the same mistake. And it is said in Annex B. It was said that under certain circumstances, UK, Ireland, nursing authorities would have to be notified. Is there such need at this day and time? I hope the administration can really review this. The Deputy Secretary said they have addressed the concerns of deputations, but then from what I could see, the documents provided by the administration are a bit lacking, so I hope you can really review this. I would like to ask Professor Sylvia Feng on one point about paragraph 2, Annex A. The view of the Academy is that the proposed sections 9A and 9B regarding the Council must approve the arrangements or the transition of full registration or enrollment. Can you elaborate why you think this way? Thank you.
Professor Fong, I thank Mr. Lai for his question. Our academy believes when you phrase it as the NCHK must approve, you treat the NCHK as a rubber stamp. When it's a matter of principle, you do not phrase it as must. The authority council should be able to choose to approve or not approve, but in cases of disapproval, the nursing council should state the reasons. But the deputy secretary has said that they can look into this. But if the law states that the nursing council must approve the application, then the council has no choice but to approve the application even despite the inquiries that will compromise the authority of the nursing council, and that does nothing to protect the public. Chairman, I agree with Professor Fong. The bill states that certain conditions need to be met. The employer of a non-local nurse may think that the nurse meets all the conditions. Then the nursing council will have no choice but have to approve that application because the law says must approve. This means as long as all the conditions are met, the nursing council must approve the application. The approval becomes a mere formality. This means the nursing council does not make the final decision. So we must look into the clauses in greater detail to see what the actual effect of the clause is. We need to revisit this point and decide whether we should give the nursing council some flexibility. Can we get a response from the government, please? I thank Mr. Lai for his comment. We have just received this written submission. We will reread the submission to see if there are issues that we haven't addressed. But I want to give a brief reply to the points raised by Mr. Lai. Annex B. It says that in Annex B, we are using some outdated phrases. Actually, we will delete those outdated phrases in this exercise. You see the outdated phrases because those are found in the old provisions. But in any way, we will look at our provisions once again to see whether some provisions require further explanation, and we will update members on this. For special registration, when an employer follows the NCHK's criteria in assessing a nurse's work performance, and what happens next? The proposed bill is that the nursing council we also look at cases of non-local nurses who meet all the conditions. So one requirement is to work for 5 years, and the appraisal has to show that the non-local nurses meet the conditions. The nursing council does not accept just everything the employer of the nurses submit. The members of the nursing council have to be satisfied that the performance of the non-local nurses does meet the criteria set by the nursing council. When an applicant meets certain conditions, the application is granted. That's our long-standing practice. A long-standing professional body has the right of approval. We have to let the applicant know what conditions they have to meet to secure an approval. And when the authority disapproves the application, the authority has to state the reasons for rejection. We note the concerns from the trade, and that's why we're trying to explain this to everyone. So during those 5 years, the nursing council has a say about the performance, but after the 5 years, then the nursing council has to give the license. Chairman, we haven't come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny yet, but I want to put this on the record. There are conditions to meet. How do we tell whether a condition is met? The nursing council should be the one making the final decision. The nursing council should be satisfied that each and every condition is met before the nursing council must approve the application. So the issue is, who makes the final decision on whether a nurse meets all the conditions? When we get to the clause-by-clause scrutiny, we will revisit this in greater detail. But we all agree on this, that a professional body with power over licenses should have the final say. Speaking for the second round, Ms. Chen Hoyan. There's an acute shortage of nurses now. So I support this proposal to bring in non-local nurses. I thank the 14 or 15 deputations from the healthcare sector. This bill will have implications for the healthcare sector. So I wonder maybe the 14 deputations can address some points that I have in mind. I just listened to the Deputy Secretary's explanation. The Deputy Secretary said the employer's assessment is not final. Ultimately, it depends on whether the applicant meets the conditions set by the Nursing Council. The Nursing Council sets the criteria. The employer hires the nurse. It's a work-based assessment, so that means the employer assesses the nurse. The Nursing Council only looks at the assessment report. But the person who checks off the boxes needs to be done by the employer. That's my point. When a candidate sits an exam and fails the exam, as long as the student fails, and that's it. But now we're talking about work performance. The employer's assessment is not final, but the nursing council makes the final decision. The problem is the nursing council does not have someone at the institution to keep an eye on the nurse's performance. So my question for the deputations today is, a specified institution makes a decision on whether the non-local nurse can get full registration. Do you have concerns? I keep laboring this point because we're now dropping the licensing exam and a non-local nurse can get full registration. But we need to ensure quality. Of course, we need more manpower. So I want to hear from our deputations. Can you let us know, have your thoughts so that we can let the government know what we think? Chairman, Professor Wong. There's a long-standing practice for work-based assessment. The hospital authority had staff assess our students because the HA knows what the work environment is like. But after a while, the hospital authority realized it had a staff shortage, so the nursing schools assess the students. But indicators matter for schools. If, say, half the students in the class fail, then the professors get into trouble. Biases are a risk. If I get to choose, I would prefer doing it at the clinical stage. Now, the assessor matters. When we work with the AA, there are honorary clinical instructors. Each nursing school gets these honorary instructors to lead the students. Here, the relationship between the students and the instructor is not that between an employer and an employee. There's a pool of such instructors. These people have trained nurses at tertiary institutions over years. They know what the core competencies are. They know the assessment approach well. So for me, I'm not too worried about this. If there are biases or favoritism, someone is bound to step up and report it in the nursing sector. I cannot rule out such issues. But I believe even if that happens, that should be just a tiny fraction of cases. Response from the government. Someone at the back. Ms. Cecilia So. Thank you, Chairman. I thank Ms. Chen for her question. As we mentioned in our submission, the Nursing Council should set the criteria about the credentials. The NCHK should also lay down clear and uniform standards for assessment. I've worked in a hospital setting for many years. The HA and the DH have standard appraisal reports. Those appraisal reports have been around for a long time. They work. For smaller bodies, though, or for non-local, non-governmental organizations, they may lack a well-developed appraisal system. So we hope the NCHK can design a uniform appraisal system so all employers can adopt this mechanism so everyone follows the same standards in assessing the competencies of the nurses and the day-to-day work performance of the nurses. The appraising officers should be experienced in assessing whether a nurse meets the requirement. You need someone to keep an eye on the nurse's daily performance. When something goes wrong, someone should point that out and offer more training. And we need to avoid scenarios where patients' lives are put at risk. Thank you.
I can see that Professor Kwan wishes to speak as well. Yes, Chair, thank you. I would like to echo on the points made by Professor Wong. On quality assurance, we did make a few points on continuous assessment and work-based assessment and what kind of measures can be put in place to ensure effective implementation. We do agree that work-based assessment is an effective method for assessing performance of nurses. For nurses, some of them may do very well in examination, but they are poor in clinical performance. So this is not exactly new to the nursing sector. But we are afraid that there may be potential conflicts of interest if employing institutions are to assess the performance of nurses. So we hope that there are some safeguards in place. For example, assessors should be subject to regulation and they should be provided with training to ensure there is fair implementation of the criteria devised by the Nursing Council. So these assessors should also have the relevant credentials that would qualify them in appraising the performance of nurses. Regarding clinical assessment, it is not exactly closed doors assessment. The performance of nurses would be open for their peers to see, and if they are judged, if their performance is judged to be satisfactory when their performance is not, I believe their peers would have something to say. So I think the mechanism would work. I just hope that there are safeguards put in place to ensure that there is effective regulation. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kwan. The administration, any response? Yes, I do have a brief response. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, deputations, and thank you, member, for the views. We will continue to flesh out the implementation arrangements of the mechanism. We'll work with the Nursing Council to work out the detailed guidelines and criteria. The assessors would most likely be someone very experienced. They may not necessarily be direct supervisors, but even if they are, we may consider incorporating third-party gatekeeper requirements. We'll work with the Nursing Council and the Hospital Authority in this regard. Thank you. I myself actually have some questions. It is said that additional resources should be deployed to the Nursing Council to deal with the increased workload. In continuing nursing education, as well as the alternative pathways to admit non-locally trained nurses. We have tens of thousands of nurses in Hong Kong. In order to deal with such work, that is indeed quite a heavy workload. Will the administration deploy more resources to the Nursing Council to upgrade their system in order to meet the requirement for continuing nursing education, CNE. On assessments, the criteria would be drawn up by the Nursing Council. But something is different from the registration for medical practitioners, because for medical practitioners, there would be a special registration committee. Would you consider setting up something similar for the registration of nurses? If so, what will be the composition? As said by other members, if employers are to be assessors, there may be potential conflicts of interests. So will you consider engaging third-party assessors, for example, that would be there for a period of 5 years to handle the relevant applications? I hope that at the next meeting we'll have someone from the Nursing Council who can answer these questions if you can't today. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. We do want to make sure that there is a computer system that can deal with the increased workload on the processing of applications, and we will work with the Department of Health Secretariat on this to make sure these administrative arrangements can be implemented smoothly. We are still working out the workflow, and we are reviewing the manpower needed. We are working with the Department of Health on this. The other question was on applications, I believe. Yes, on the special registration committee. Will you set up something similar for nurses? And what will be the composition if you are to set up a committee? Oh, right, thank you. We have consulted the sector on this regard, and we believe the number of nurses involved would be quite a huge number. The Nursing Council already has arrangements in place to see what qualifications will be broadly comparable with local qualifications. We believe the existing mechanism is effective in reviewing the qualifications overseas, so we may not need the arrangements that we have for medical practitioners. Thank you. Well, I can see that the notice has been posted on the website as inviting submissions. We have received 6 submissions. Apart from one restricted submission that was sent to members by restricted email, other submissions have been uploaded onto the LegCo website, and the written response of the administration has been sent to members. The paper number is CB-4244/2024. I believe the administration has talked about the written response, but I wonder if the administration would like to provide more details. Well, thank you, Chair. I believe we have given enough information on that. We do not need to supplement our response. Thank you. Thank you. In that case, I would like to thank deputations for attending today's meeting. If you have other submissions, you may submit another written submission to the Secretariat. You may also leave your speech here on in the council, in the conference room today, but please write your name and your organization before you leave on the speech. And I hope that at the next meeting, we will have the Nursing Council's representatives here to talk about their future plans, and we will go into clause-by-clause examination at the next meeting. The next meeting date has yet to be confirmed. The Secretary will notify members of the date and time of the next meeting as soon as possible. Thank you. There being no other business, meeting adjourned.